Jacksonville, a child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks and their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history in this land of flowers.
The Weekman was on the 29th of September 2018 from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. This has been a very interesting week. A lot of high drama, soap opera type behavior coming out of the U.S. Congress. In particular, the Senate hearings on the Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and the attempts of the Republican Party, their leadership in the Senate, and the Trump administration to fast-track this nomination. It simply could not be done. When the allegations came out of California by Christine Blasey Ford, a research psychologist and professor in Palo Alto, and also she does research at Stanford University. She had been a high school student in suburban Maryland in the 80s, and Brett Kavanaugh was moving about. And there's been much literature written on what Brett Kavanaugh and his cronies, gang, or whatever you want to call them, chums, mates, did in terms of their partying atmosphere. It was in the yearbook, 100 kegs of beer, a burst. Well, that was their slogan, so you can kind of understand they were in a party atmosphere. And that was synonymous with the quote-unquote frat boys attitude of the 60s and the early 70s. And at certain universities, particularly in the South, where there was a lot of partying going on. Partying in itself is not particularly a negative thing, but however, there were negative consequences, and that is what happens. The quote-unquote dark side of society comes out there in terms of harassment of women, such things as harassment of college pledges. Now, that's not in this, but that is part of that and partial of that atmosphere. And it showed up and revisited in the Senate. Now, the problem here, and we have Uncle Carl Rove here, the title of his little polemic, Democrats Disgrace the Senate. Now, obviously, that is the opinion of the Republicans. But at the same time, where is the opinion of the wider audience? In other words, the American public. It is being formed on social media, in the media at large, and by editorial writers, pundits, etc. And it's very important when you read a news dispatch, whether it be from the Washington Post or whomever, the People's World or wherever it is, what the editorial writer does, in some newspapers, obviously the writer, the editorial. And in terms of what we were doing, we used here at WBRM the title of our Christine Blassie Kavanaugh hearing show was The End Game. Now that came out of Fox News, comparing the hearings to a football game. And in the American, in the American context, much of business is and has been for a number of years rotating around a football game. We baseball purists would say it's a baseball game, but a baseball game is a little different animal than a football game. A football game is basically a 50-minute or an hour, 4 different quarters for our listeners in Australia, where obviously you're playing cricket or football. But it is, and perhaps some rugby, because we do go internationally here and say hello to our listeners in Australia, our listeners in Austria, and around the world. A few in China, not as many as we would want to have. In France, in all of the Americas, across the EU, and in Ghana and various other countries. But sort of understanding what the American politic is about. And this is why it was very important. We're not running a stream of consciousness here, but to bring in the demonstrations at the National Football League, because much of the conservative ethos is put into sport and how we view sport, particularly football, the patriotism involved there, the training of young athletes. They had a right-wing organization called, what was it, the Association of Christian Athletes, how, quote-unquote, quasi-religion plays into athletics, particularly in football, and so-called patriotism, the sponsorship of the various branches of the American military, the Department of Defense. But those things are played in there. The honoring of warriors, not only at NBA at NFL games, but at baseball games. In other words, that is furthering a certain type of ideology. All of those things came together in the United States Senate this week. And you have to look at the history of things to understand what is going on here. The Kavanaugh nomination was about setting up a right of center court to do the will of the business community primarily. And also at the same time, because it is doing the will of quote-unquote the business community, it has to be by definition anti-worker. So if you have an anti-worker Supreme Court, they would be anti-union, and a court that is mashed or wallowing in a class struggle, a class conflict. Now, Uncle Carl has talked before about conflict, and various conservative writers don't like the idea of conflict, or in universities teaching the idea of conflict. But it is there, and it played out on the TV screens, this ideological conflict. Kavanaugh's right-wing ideology, his opportunism, his participation in the Ken Starr investigations of Bill Clinton was opportunistic, no doubt about that. And there was a whole lot of, as one would say, dirty politics involved in that, the slandering of Clinton beyond what it should have been. I'm not a fan of Bill Clinton, but the point is that was the whole idea. But beyond that, the idea was to stymie the Democrats and these, particularly any progressive element. Now Clinton was a centrist Democrat, but at the same time, you get one, you get all. And that was the whole idea of that campaign. So this is why the creation of Brett Kavanaugh, and also at the same time, as Madonna correctly puts out there, to stamp out the women's movement. Now, the women's movement is bigger than Me Too, much bigger. It's an economic movement. Me Too is looking at a social reflection, but at the same time, it hits on and pierces the glass ceiling, summed up by DJ Trump himself, what he called a powerful men, period. But Brett Kavanaugh is a representative of powerful men. He's an appendage of a system, so you have to define what the system is. It goes much beyond Brett Kavanaugh and what he represents there. You can look at the decisions that he has made on the circ, the D.C. circ, which is normally called the Second Supreme Court, and its impact on the nation as a whole. When you are looking at the so-called policy, and we don't deal in policy here, but if you're looking at so-called policy and where it dissects with law and precedent, if you recall, the Supreme Court has been on the verge of stopping many things. The Plessy decision effectively resegregated and Jim Crowed America. With Plessy, and if you go also to Dred Scott, and those kinds of decisions where the court was able to untangle things and to obstruct. It's obstructionist. The same thing McConnell said about Barack Obama's administration. His job was to obstruct it. So when you hear what political consultants call these flippables, like the Democrats disgrace the Senate, the disgrace of the Senate was an ill-prepared, ill-investigated candidate named Kavanaugh. That was the problem. They did not thoroughly vent him, and when additional charges came forward, allegations, they should have immediately paused the hearing, investigated those allegations properly. So now the FBI has come onto the case, otherwise known as the Hoover Boys, by order of DJ Trump. And then the editorial writers would say pressure from critics. Well, the critic itself is a negative connotation. That's why we're back to watching the headlines. What has happened, not necessarily with critics, it's with the allegations that are out there that need to be thoroughly investigated. And numerous people have moved in there. So his diagnosis is, and he wrote this on the 27th of September, the American Bar Association, hardly a liberal bastion there. It has historically been a more conservative bastion, but things have changed. In other words, evolution had taken place at the American Bar Association. They used to vent all Supreme Court candidates, including this one. They said he was qualified. Well, there was an instance there that the Republicans under G.W. Bush had cut out the American Bar Association from venting their Supreme Court justices. But that has went around to the point that, well, as a person judiciary, nearly, I hope there's a word, qualified to be on the court. Yes, Kavanaugh had been a judge on the circ, and he has written opinions, however flawed they are. But this is the whole idea when you speak of judges that do not make law. Well, Kavanaugh is going to make law. He would probably like to repeal Roe v. Wade. But the problem there is this is not the proper time. Yes, they could repeal that, but the nation is already opened up, is already polarized. And this is what the Republicans are scared of. It's the polarization that's now favored the Republican Party, the more reactionary elements in American society. They would not be on this time scale. But that is not happening. We'll also do the Cook Report. Let me go to Uncle Carl here. This has been editorializing in view of Uncle Carl. Now, he wrote this. Thursday will be the... wait a minute here, just a sec. Thursday will be wait a minute. Will be on an immediately consequential day for America. As of this writing, Dr. Ford, my word, he calls it Christine Blasey Ford, is scheduled to appear the morning before the Judiciary Committee, and followed by Kavanaugh. They both deserved to be heard, and they were heard, but the hearing could devolve into a circus. Well, there was less circus there. What the Republicans decided to do was use a right-wing prosecutor to come in and try to break down Dr. Ford. And the line of questioning there, of course, they have a 5-minute situation, and Ford didn't like that, because when you're questioning a person in court, the whole idea is a constant barrage of questions. Now, you can have those questions very strongly worded, or you can build up, getting the person used to your voice, etc., gauging the jury if it's a jury trial, and that particular situation. So what they decided to do was, the only thing they could do is present Dr. Ford, and incorrectly, as a hysterical woman. That flies against a person that is trained academically. Academic people are not normally hysterical women or hysterical men. Now, because of the type of hearing this was, emotion was shown there, tears were tearing up, and that was part of it. The woman was literally sexually assaulted. I don't think there is any doubt about that, because one of Kavanaugh's cronies, named Judge, tried to say that, well, the incident occurred, but she had the wrong person and there was a different individual involved. So what he did was, I don't know if they brought this out in the hearing or not, because I did not listen to the whole hearing, but many times in conversation, people that are actually lying or giving false testimony, particularly in depositions, tend to bring in some factual events. So that's what Judge did. Judge alluded that the event took place, it just was not Ford. Well, now the FBI, Hoover boys will and girls will focus in on this and go further. In other words, I assume they will find out where the house was. They will interview the owners of the house. They will interview people that were in the area. They will need to interview the people that were at the parties and other parties to establish some sort of surmise, to further the surmise and get the whole core of this case. And you can only do that when you properly do the investigation. Now, how is this different from the Hillary server investigation? Well, that was a forensic investigation. They were investigating the content of the server, and they did interview Hillary Clinton as to what she did, and various other people were associated with that server were also interviewed. But that was a different type of referral. It was not for a committee. That was a criminal investigation. Now, this is for the purpose of the committee, so it's not a criminal investigation. It is a fact-finding mission, and that is where we are. Let me just continue this. Dianne Feinstein could have avoided the chaos if she acted properly in July after receiving Ford's letter alleging Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her at a party of teenagers in the early, and he put the word teenagers in here, in the early 80s. Senator Feinstein, he called her, trying to devalue her position. Mrs. Feinstein could have promptly delivered the letter to the FBI, so agents could have interviewed Mrs. Ford, the Kavanaugh, and the other people she claimed were present. Their responses could have been included in the judge's confirmation of background check. Well, now they will be included there. Judiciary Committee then could have privately considered the facts, including Dr. Ford's can't remember when and where, and he's putting that in. The alleged assault took place, and that the three people Ford claimed attended the party all deny any recollection of it. Dr. Ford could have kept her anonymity and Judge Kavanaugh his reputation. But, and again, he refers to as Mrs. Feinstein. He referred to Hillary Clinton as Mrs. Clinton. And that is meant to associate her with a husband, who her husband's not even in this, who finds herself in a difficult re-election campaign. Well, she's 11 points ahead. She was 20-something points ahead. But that's not the issue. Out of California will be a progressive person, whether or not she is re-elected or not. She's 85 years old. Placed venomous partisanship above fair play and professionalism. Well, there's been no professionalism exhibited in this hearing. This is a hurry-up hearing. It was not a hearing to find the facts. It was to get a nominee on the Supreme Court before they start next week. Anyway, she brought a dishonor to her decades in the Senate. Well, I'm not sure about any dishonor there that she brought in. Let me just move on down. Now comes an accusation in the New York Times that Kavanaugh exposed himself to Ramaz at Yale in a drinking session, and another even from a more salacious allegation from celebrity lawyer Mr. Avernetti. The New York Times earlier took a pass on Ramaz. A story after interviewing several dozen people without finding any who could corroborate it. But they also discovered that she recently told classmates that she wasn't certain Kavanaugh was the one who exposed himself to her. I'd not heard that before. But this is where it gets dicey there. And when these kinds of allegations are made, that's what they all are, is allegations. Ms. Ramaz was first hesitant to speak public, partially because of her memories contained gaps. Well, that's not unusual there, because she had been drinking beer. Well, we don't know how much beer she'd been drinking. Kavanaugh actually had already undergone two extensive FBI background checks. They more than likely were not that extensive, because he was checked when he was appointed to the appellate court, the circuit court. And they probably build on what they had already investigated. In other words, if you've investigated a person's background, you don't need to go back and re-interview the people. You just look at it, and if there's any new updating, they would do it. And that's probably what they did. And he goes on here to several Democrats that seem to be competing to the base themselves the most, shouting at Chairman Grassley, and he cites here Senator Harris, Senator Brooker, and repeatedly and defiantly boasted that he made public confidential documents. Well, Well, that was just showmanship. There's nothing there. Whose release the committee had already authorized. Well, and what's coming from the Senate in 2010, Richard Blumenthal falsely told, well, what does he have to do? A constituent said he served in Vietnam. Well, so what? That has already been out there. And when you see this type of article, what is happening, what is occurring here is that it's bolstering a very, very shaky case. And Uncle Carl is a master at flippables, but he couldn't flip out of this one. But when it comes to reckless, it's hard to outdo Senator Mazie Honoyer, who told male colleagues and the men of America to shut up and do the right thing for a change, which is to believe Dr. Ford, regardless of the facts. Like the Queen of Hearts, she believes Senate's first verdict afterwards. When asked about Judge Kavanaugh denials, Senator Hiroshimaana, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, she's from Hawaii, suggested that he is not entitled to the presumption of innocence because of his conservative judiciary philosophy. She then signed a fundraising appeal for MoveOn.org to help make Kavanaugh's nomination an election issue. Well, it is an election issue. That is why the Republican Party, had nominated him in the first instance as a payback to their very conservative voters, including evangelicals, on social issues. But now that his reputation is in literally tatters, it's very hard to do it. In the Globe here, a headline, Trump bows to pressure, agrees to FBI probe of Kavanaugh. Reversing course, DJ Trump bowed to Democrat demands Friday for a deeper FBI investigation of the nominee Kavanaugh after Republican Senator Flake balked at voting for the confirmation without it, and suddenly that sudden term left the Senate approval nearly uncertain amidst allegations of sexual assault. No doubt, because they know if Senator, but he said he would vote, this is Senator Flake, for the nominee. Flake indicated that he would take the next step leading to a full Senate approval. Now, he voted in the Judiciary Committee. Senator Flake is on there only after the FUBA, background checks. There were suggestions that other moderate Republicans might join the revolt, so forth here. The abrupt development gave senators, the White House, and millions of Americans following the drama at home hardly a chance to catch their breath after Thursday's emotional Senate hearing, featuring Kavanaugh angrily defending himself and the accuser, Dr. Ford, determinedly insisting that he assaulted her when they were teenagers. Emotions were still running high Friday, and protesters confronted senators in the hall. After he took his stance, the Republican leaders had little choice but to slow their rush to confirm Kavanaugh, whom they had hoped to have in place shortly after the new court term begins. And that begins on Monday, incidentally. Trump quickly followed suit, though he had vigorously resisted asking the FBI to probe the allegations of sexual misconduct by Kavanaugh, now being raised by three women. One day earlier, he had blasted the Senate process as a total sham and accused Democrats of a conspiracy of obstructionism and declared on Twitter, the Senate must vote. Now the timetable puts Trump's nominee in further peril and pushes the politically risky vote for senators to choose in November's congressional election. It also means that any case the Supreme Court hears before ninth justice in place will be decided by just 8, raising the possibility of the votes. It is clear, while still short of votes for the final approval after Thursday's hearing, they converged late into the night in a room in the Capitol with various senators, including Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, she's from Alaska, raising pointed questions, and according to those familiar with the private meeting, but granted anonymity to its discussion. Republican leaders say, and Trump ordered, that the new probe be limited in scope. And this in itself raises some problems, because if you limit it in scope, it could be called a cover-up. But there were no specific directives as to what they might include. 2 other women besides Ford have also lodged public sexual misconduct allegations against Kavanaugh. Democrats have been partially focused on getting more information from this Mark Judge character, a high school friend of Kavanaugh's, who incidentally was involved in this process, who Ford said was also in the room during her alleged assault. Judge had said he does not recall any such incident. In a new letter to the Senate panel, he said he would cooperate with any law enforcement agency assigned to investigate confidentially. Kavanaugh issued his own statement through the White House, saying that he has been interviewed by the FBI before, done background checks, called with the Senate, and answered questions on the oath, and even topics about every topic. Senators have asked. I have done everything they have requested, and will continue to cooperate, he said. Fluke, a moderate Republican at the center of Friday's uncertainty in the morning, he announced he would support Kavanaugh shortly after he was confronted in the elevator by 2 women who, through tears, said they were sexually assault victims, and implored him to change his mind. Look at me and tell me that it doesn't matter what happens to me. That's my 23-year-old Maria Gallagher, volunteer with a liberal advocacy group. The confrontation was captured by TV cameras. Soon he was working on a new deal with the Republican colleagues and Democrats in the Judiciary Committee. He announced he would vote to advance Kavanaugh's nomination to the full Senate only if the FBI would investigate. So the 11-10, that's the way the committees are set up. 2 other key Republicans, Collins and Murkowski, said they would back the plan after they and other GOP senators met an hour in Mitch McConnell's office. The West Virginia Democrat Joe Meacham said he supports Flake's call for further probe. So, and the point here is, in a 51-49 majority, is what the Republicans hold, especially given the fact that several Democrats facing tough elections this fall have announced their opposition to Kavanaugh. Bill Nelson of Florida, Donnelly of Indiana, and Tester of Montana. Flake's vote on the final approval is not assured either. So some Republicans still resist the delay, but went along with the plan that may be the only way to salvage the confirmation of Kavanaugh. I think it's overkill. That's from Orrin Hatch. He was around when they had the Thomas hearings. They have a right to request it. The FBI conducts background checks for federal nominees, but the agency does not make judgments on the credibility or significance of allegations. It compiles information about the nominees' past and provides its findings to the White House, which passes them along to the committee. Republicans may say reopening the FBI investigation is unnecessary. Agents could interview the accusers and witnesses and give additional evidence or details that could help collaborate or disprove the allegations here. This is from the Associated Press and also various other people, Alan Frame and Lisa Mascaro, I suppose is how you pronounce her name. Let's go to Charlie Cook here. Now, and Charlie Cook is writing in the Cook Report on the 28th of September. That was yesterday. The Kavanaugh fights midterm stakes. The eyes and ears of the political world would be upon the Senate Judiciary Committee confirmation hearings this week. Brett Kavanaugh against Dr. Ford, who has accused Kavanaugh of sexual assault. And also Debbie Ramez there. I haven't met Kavanaugh, Ford, or Ramez. I wasn't present at any of the occasions in the question. I'm not the lawyer. Obviously, I don't know what they did or didn't happen in either incident, or know who isn't telling the truth. But that hasn't stopped many people from both the left and the right from passing judgment. It's pretty clear that more people whom political philosophy is of left of center seem to believe Ford, and my guess is Ramez. While those to the right of center are more likely to believe Kavanaugh. Yet another example of where you stand depends on where you sat. It's reminiscent of the 2000 Florida election drama. Remember the hanging chads? Half of the country was going to feel that the election was stolen. The other half was which half? By the way the Senate testimony played out and how credible each person is will make a big difference amongst small numbers of people who approach the situation with open minds. Not very many, probably, those around. But how these controversies affect the 2018 midterm election is going into this mess. Democrats seem to be considerably more energized and agitated than Republicans, it seems to me. Anyway, hard for Democrats and left to get more motivated than they already are. So it's obvious the answer to what changed in the current dynamic is something that would motivate Republicans, making the right more aggressive, especially Kavanaugh failing a confirmation vote or dropping out. Given the political environment, a Kavanaugh defeat or withdrawal now and the November 6th elections would be more likely to gravitize of the right than further motivate the left. Conversely, a Kavanaugh confirmation would further outrage Democrats and the left particularly, and the not insurmountable risks of college-educated women, many of them who have already have an extremely low opinion of DJ Trump. But since that group is already pretty torqued up, the change from the status quo might not be dynamic. A Kavanaugh nomination might also feed into the complacency that we've seen on the right, something that is already a real challenge for the Republicans. So perversely, whichever party loses on the Kavanaugh nomination might actually have more of a winning issue in the election. And that is something the Democrats look at in the end. Kavanaugh's fight is not likely to be a true game changer. The dynamic of this election seems to be locked into a direction that has been terrifying Republicans. The only question is how bad the outcome will be. It certainly seems to be very likely that Democrats will take back control of the House, but will they gain the 25 to 40 seats? They need 23. Current congressional district boundaries in most states and natural population sorting provides somewhat of a protective wall for the GOP. but the wave is if the wave is significantly tall, it will breach it. Translates into Democrats gaining 50 to 60 seats on their past district maps, but the jury is out on whether that can happen this year. The Senate, where Kavanaugh's outcome matters more, there's a little, there's a little dispute, that there is a wave and a big one, but the number of competitive Senate seats that are up in red states will likely diminish the impact. 8 of the Senate races rate as toss-ups in the Cook Report, rating Democrat incumbent Bill Nelson. Bill Nelson, incidentally, has been helped by Andrew Gillum in Florida. A poll recently had him up by as many as 9 points. He's been up by 4 points, 5 points, depending on which poll you go to. But that particular situation there with DeSantis and him labeling Andrew Gillum as a monkey. Well, the monkey evidently is swinging through the trees of central Florida, and Bill Nelson hopes to be on the line there and get back into the Senate again. Now, in these other seats here, Joe Donnelly is holding his own. Heidi Handicap in North Dakota, along with the Republican Ted Cruz. Now, that has been changing down there. Beto O'Rourke has been closing in on him. And then there's also Dean Heller in Nevada, in a state carried by Hillary Clinton, could help him out. For Democrats, seats that are rated as lean Democrat, and only Tina Smith in Minnesota is in a Clinton state, barely there. Joe Tester, he's out in Montana. Sherrod Brown, he's ahead in Ohio. Joe Meacham is ahead in West Virginia. And Trump hasn't been able to help him. So size does matter in the Senate. Is the wave full enough to tip the brink of 8 toss-up races, disproportionate Democratic direction, even in states that are pink and in deep red states, and neutralize to some degree the natural Republican tendencies? We may have a better answer to that question when the Kavanaugh saga ends. Well, yeah, but campaigns are made by the groundwork, and the groundwork for this campaign has been already laid, period. House ratings change. 5 more races moved Democratically. I don't know if this is by David Wasterman. I'll just sum this up. We're running a little long here, I think. 6 weeks out, the Republican ads aim to disqualify Democrats early don't appear to be sticking. Well, that happens many times. Labor Day polls in 2 weeks show with Mamie Waters, she's out in California, 45. And Lacey in New Jersey, 7. David Britt, he's the man that ousted the Speaker of the House, trailing, and not long ago they were in lead categories. There are a few notable exceptions. This Andy Barr, he's in Kentucky, has erased his deficit in the past thanks to Republican hard-hitting ads on the Democrat Amy McGrath. For bragging in an outstate, oh, that's just political. I'm further left than anybody in the state of Kentucky. Oh, well. That doesn't seem to be very much there. Both parties are seeing Republican numbers continue to erode in professional suburbs, and in some the Republicans fear they still haven't hit a rock bottom. Now, these are some of the ratings here. Kaufman, he's in Colorado, 6. That has moved from a toss-up to lean Democrats. Peter King, he's in New York, a likely Republican. That's out on Staten Island, I think. Ted Baum, he's in he's in North Carolina, 13, from a lean Republican to toss-up. In Pennsylvania, 1, that's Fitzpatrick, from lean Republican to toss-up. And John Carter, he's in Texas, 31, from likely to lean Republican. So those are some of those, and we won't go into the races here, but Peter King, I said Staten Island, it's Long Island. Anyway, King has routinely cobbled his opposition, clobbered, excuse me, I said cobble, taking more than 62% in the past four races. And he also hasn't faced a real opponent in decades. That is Gretchen Shirley, 37, was just 11 when King, 74, was first elected, and the nonprofit consultant has raised over $1 million. Emmons List has been with her. Shirley will cast King as out of touch, no doubt about that. King has $3 million on hand, but Shirley recently beat the incumbent on the cable TV. Will she be able to pull it off? Well, possibly so. So that is some of the Cook report. Let me just check. We're running a little over here. We'll do the sport here and get the baseball scores in. We'll do college ball on the Monday morning quarterback. Of course, we'll see you on Monday morning on the Monday morning quarterback. We're also working on a numbers man report that is called This Week in Economics. We have an open source report. We'll be talking about the Linux kernel maintained on Linus Torvalds and his potty language, and he's out to get, as one would say, re-educated. Yeah. Anyway, anger management or whatever. I'm not sure which one he's doing. The Twins and White Sox in Minnesota, 2-1, no doubt, on a cool night. All these nights are cool. The Cardinals and the Cubs, 8-4 Cubs. Wainwright, the knuckleballer, was a loser there. They were in Chicago and Wrigley Field. Few days to go now, 2 days to go. I think Sunday's the last day. The Pirates and Reds, Pirates 8-4. The Yankees and Red Sox in Boston, in Fenway Park, 11-6. The Yankees, the Sox have already taken care of the business. The Astros and Orioles in Baltimore, Camden Yard, Astros 2-1. They've also clinched. Atlanta and the Phillies in Philadelphia. Atlanta 10-2. The Phillies going in the wrong direction. The Marlins and Mets in New York. Marlins 8-1. The Blue Jays and Rays in Florida. Blue Jays, 7-6. Cleveland in Kansas City, 14-6. Kansas City's out of it. Cleveland's moving on. The Tigers and Brewers in Milwaukee. Brewers won that game 6-5. And the Nationals and Rockies in Denver. It was Rockies 6-2 or 5-2. Anyway, my glasses on. Anyway, the White Sox and Twins. Anyway, they must have played a double hitter. Anyway, 12-4 was the final score of that Twins. And neither team is going anywhere but home in 2 days. The Athletics and Angels in Southern California, we'll say. Anyway, it was 8-5. The Athletics really need to win that game. They didn't, however. The Rangers and Mariners out in Seattle. Mariners 12-6. They did need to get a win in. And in 15. The D-backs and Padres down in San Diego. The Padres pull that one out. And the Dodgers and Giants in San Francisco. Dodgers won that one. Giants are going nowhere but home. So that's the end of that. Let's look at the standing here. There are a few races still to be, as they say, determined. But not very many. In the American League, it's all Boston. That's in the East. The Yankees will get a berth. They're 8 games out. In the Central, Cleveland, this is the American League Central, Cleveland's on top. And forget it. In the West of the American League, you have Houston and you have Oakland. Oakland's got a berth there. Houston, so with Oakland, 5.5 games back. Seattle 14.5 games back. They're out of it. In the National League East, let's see who is there. It's Atlanta. They have clinched. And the closest thing to them is Washington, but they're 9 games back. You can forget about that. In the National League Central, Chicago. And the Brewers. Brewers is 1 game back. They could have a tie. In the National League West, it is the Colorado Rockies, and the Dodgers are 1 game back with 2 days to go. And then we have the D-backs, but they fell 3 games back and knocked themselves out of the race. So the race effectively is between the Rockies and the Dodgers. The Rockies and the Dodgers have, at least the Rockies are already in. They have a Z by their name, which basically means they're in playoff contention there. And the Dodgers being 1 game back there, this could eventually end up in a tie. Very hard to say which direction that is going. And let's see, the Dodgers here. I think we grab up their schedule where they are with the games that they have left. Dodgers beat Giants. I think they play the Giants. Move closer to the playoff spot. They haven't gotten there yet. That was on Friday night. So they have Saturday and Sunday to go. And we'll have the results on the Monday Morning Quarterback. This will do it for us. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll see you on the Monday Morning Quarterback. Old Boston Red here for WBRN Radio, Boston Red Network, etc.